Tell us a bit more about that and some of the cases you've been involved in. The Rise Above movement, RAM for short, that was a very bizarre case. I don't know, an outrageous case. Don't really know what to call it. To recap for people, the legal situation with Charlottesville was, of course, that the protesters, which was the side that was protesting the removal of Lee, the statue in downtown Charlottesville, they had a legal permit to be there. That, of course, was what do you call it, dissolved mid rally, mid protest, basically, and they declared it an unlawful assembly, and that's when all hell broke loose. But right. The counter protesters did not have a permit to be there. And yet we saw a total just collapse of the police, and also in the hindsight, I think you pointed out that there's actually been no Antifa members of the violent left that were there fighting and starting fights that day that actually have been charged or arrested. Is that correct?
Yeah, not to my knowledge. Maybe at the state level, somebody's suffered a slap on the wrist somewhere, but certainly at the federal level, there's been absolutely no prosecution of the Antifa whatsoever. The federal government has taken an absolute political hardline against the right wing. So yeah, this, like you said, we had a permit for Charlottesville. The ACLU stepped in and said that the city of Charlottesville could not take away the permit. So it was reinstated back at Lee Park. And then once it was back at Lee Park, the government, they screwed us again. Quite frankly, we were supposed to have the whole park. They quarantined us, sectioned it off, and then they allowed Black Lives Matter and the Antifa to just come right up to the event that was supposed to be our permitted space. And then they allowed violence to unfold, and then they dispersed the rally. It actually wasn't even mid-rally. It was before we even started.
That's true. That's true.
They wouldn't let them set up the speakers. None of us got to speak. Not a single one of us were allowed to speak that day. They dispersed it once Black Lives Matter rushed the crowd and, came in with the SWAT team and all else. And then they allowed the left wing to riot for hours and hours and hours. So it was an insane set of circumstances. But the fact that these people did 100% cross state lines to come to our rally to initiate violence against us, and the police did nothing and actually set it up. It shows just how biased the federal government is, because, like we pointed out, not a single Antifa has been arrested for serial rioting, which is actually what they did. And instead, they charged the guys defending themselves and all of us with what the Antifa did.
Yeah, with the aid of the media, Augustus. Obviously, it's spinning this narrative of and to his credit, of course, Trump did say just the most common sense thing imaginable, which was there was good people on both sides, right? It's like,
and that's another story, man. Is that after Charlottesville, and we all had to leave Virginia, lickety split, right? And during that time, the next 3 days that things were unfolding in Virginia, and the governor was coming out with these statements about you're not welcome in Virginia and all this, the alt-right, all these civic nationalists, all these people trying to throw everyone under the bus that had anything to do with Charlottesville, they were trying to get other people to denounce me, to denounce anybody involved with it, especially those of us who were, originally in their CivNat club. And, they were parroting this leftist narrative through and through. Then on a Tuesday, the Tuesday after the rally, Trump comes out in a press junket because one of these journalists attacks him on it. And he says, look, there were good people on both sides. You people don't have all the facts. Frankly, we still don't have all the facts. And you guys are trying to push me into the statements that I can't make. And then that's when the so-called journalists and the alt-right started saying, well, Trump says the alt-left was committing acts of violence. Trump says that the media narrative against Charlottesville is a lie. And the question is, why did all these journalists, these people holding themselves out as journalists, wait till Trump gave them that remark to validate what all of us were saying about Charlottesville from the beginning?
Right. Yeah, it's very bizarre. And before we go on and talk a bit more about RAM and specifically their case and the publication that targeted them, which was based on biased information, let's just be honest about that.
Right.
From my take, it was just clear that, I don't know if I would go so far to call it the intelligence services or agencies or something like that. People have said that there was riddled with like FBI people there that day and things like that. In that sense, it it was a setup to try to stifle a growing grassroots movement in its tracks effectively, and this was a very effective way of doing that, of basically turning it violent, blaming the right wing, and then saying, see, these people are maniacs, we can't trust them, and kind of beginning to create the straw man really in that way. What else would you add to that in terms of why they did what they did that day?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the entire A, B, and C through Z of why they did what they did, was to destroy the right wing. And it's like that scene in The Godfather, when Tom is talking to Michael and he says, Hyman Roth played this one beautifully. There's no doubt that they took this and they spun it and they turned it against us in a way that was undeniably brilliant. But yeah, the FBI, they've been doing this for generations now. The city of Charlottesville and the city of Charlottesville Police Department, maybe not, but the way they did this, it was surreal to walk out of that park and leave where there was no violence whatsoever. Like, we led the first contingent out there. There was no violence. It was perfectly ordered exit, and we all got back to McIntyre Park, and then later on, like a couple hours later, we get to a hotel and see the news, and it's just mass chaos. It's this neo-Nazi terror rally all over the news. The media's got priests on there condemning white nationalism. All the moral high horses are being ponied out for the show, and it was this alternate dimension that the media created in order to further that entire leftist agenda of destroying the right wing. So it's been a long, like you said, a conspiracy theory about the government and the media and the Antifa all working together, but Charlottesville proves that. It's not a conspiracy theory. There is hard evidence for that.
Absolutely. I was going to pull up that the independent report that was done. I forget what legal
report. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that was pretty interesting. It was pretty telling. Talking about how both the Virginia State Police and also the Charlottesville police were giving stand-down orders. Don't even get involved unless it's like really bad in terms of the physical assault and the violence and things like that. So it's stand-down orders basically. But let's talk about RAM specifically. As you have more to add to that, of course, feel free to elaborate on this that we're discussing. But the Rise Above movement was there. It was one of the many different groups that were there. Anyone was free to come, meaning they were bound to be a number of organizations and groups to show up that day. What do you want to tell people about RAM for those who don't know anything about them?
RAM was just an organization that it was some kids in SoCal. Well, not kids. I mean, they're grown men. But they're in SoCal and they're training. They're bettering themselves. They're straight edge, which means they're off drugs and alcohol. They're getting physically fit. They're doing gymnastic things. And they go to these rallies, and they are there to defend people like us. They're there to defend the people who are speakers. They're there to defend the people who are showing up to hear us speak. So, when violence breaks out, we thank God for the people like RAM who are there to save our asses, quite frankly. So that's basically all it was. And there, like you said, a slew of organizations. There are hundreds of organizations in the right wing. None of them are terrorist organizations. Everybody knows, who has watched all of this unfold for the past several years. They've seen Antifa actually start these riots, whether it's the inauguration of Trump or it's shutting down the speech of Milo Yiannopoulos at Berkeley, where they're setting fires in the streets or, setting cars on fire, throwing bricks through windows. Everybody's seen what Antifa does. So to think that a group like RAM, who is based on gymnastics and exercise and being physically fit and fighting and all these things, to think that they're going to show up and not help defend people, that would be a direct dereliction of duty. So everybody knows Antifa was violent, including these guys in RAM, including all of us. There are people wearing helmets. There are people, with protective eye gear because they get maced all the time. Antifa are out of fucking control in this country.
They twisted that on us, I guess, as they said. Exactly. It was only the right wing that came. Why did they come armed and stuff? And it's like, well,
exactly.
Maybe they came to be able to, in a position where they wanted to defend themselves because of what has happened the prior 2 years, where basically any high-scale event, even low-scale event to a certain extent, these people were out and they were shutting it down. They were turning violent, and it was an obvious just a ramping up process at this stage. You also felt that it was a need or an opportunity for the media establishment to come out and defend or deflect from Antifa violence and just say, oh, they were there like fighting the good cause. We saw this kind of reporting on CNN and MSNBC and all these outlets that are basically trying to deflect and only look at the violence from one end,
Yeah, and it's not even just the media. I mean, like I said, the Trump appointee, the U.S. attorney who is behind this entire case, he's the son of a former governor of Virginia, who was also a former United States senator from Virginia, wealthy Democratic family, supporters of the Clintons. And when he gave the press conference on October 2nd, when they arrested the first 4 guys for the Charlottesville case, he gave that press conference and he thanked ProPublica, who, like you said, was basing all their information on the Antifa. He thanked ProPublica for the great work that they've done for federal investigators. And that shows you, like, it's not just the media who's parroting this, this violent right-wing nonsense. This guy actually said everybody involved in Charlottesville is a white supremacist, and all of these people who were counter-demonstrators, they were just demonstrating against these evil Nazis, the white supremacists, excuse me. I don't think he used the word Nazis, and that's his actual language in the press release about the case, the press conference. I mean, he said this live on television. It's insane.
ProPublica, total bias, total just like agenda-driven, like so many other outlets these days. I'm amazed the kind of reporting that we've seen from CNN. Chris Cuomo, which of course is the brother of the New York governor currently. Forget his first name, Cuomo. He's just out in the open defending Antifa, defending their actions in relation to Charlottesville. We've seen the same from many other outlets as well. So this is the kind of environment that we're up against, Augustus, in terms of like trying to just get the right information out there, that people that were there, they know what happened. But as you say, as they're watching this on television, they're just like, it's like, what reality am I part of here? It's just like unreal to see that the skewing and the twisting is so, I mean, it's effectful and it's skilled nonetheless. But it's a little, what do you call it? Like the hair stands up on the back of your neck. Like, what's happening here? Like, how can this be, right?
Yeah, it's like, when you're growing up and you've got to read 1984 as part of your required reading in high school, and they're talking about this dystopian future. And, everybody in conservative circles and liberal circles, they all want to talk about, well, this is double speak, or, this is Orwellian, or this is Big Brother tactics. And, sooner or later, we're going to live in this dystopian future described by Orwell. But at this point, people are starting to realize we're actually living there right now. It's no longer a dystopian future. It is the present. You've also got films and books like, what was it, I Am the Emperor, the Kurt Vonnegut book, Harrison Bergeron, that's what I'm looking for, where he's, this dangerous fugitive who escaped from the handicapper general's office because they're trying to equalize everybody. And clearly the only way to make everybody equal is to handicap the gifted. So he comes into this symphony where all the ballerinas, they're weighed down with weights. And he comes in a yoke, and he's got these, things that are intermittently putting sounds into his mind, like his father is intelligent. So they blast his mind with sounds so he can't think straight. So, he's just as dumb as everybody else. And this is how they equalize people in this dystopian future. And then you see this now in 2019, in the current year, and you realize this is actually happening as we speak. It's no longer parody. It's no longer satire. It's no longer a warning. This is unfolding before our eyes.
Why do you think that ProPublica targeted the Rise Above movement specifically? Because I'm sure they've written about other groups there too, but they really went after them.
I think it's because it was easy. I think it was low-hanging fruit. These guys, they're lazy. The Antifa did all the work, quite frankly. I think they thanked NoCal Antifa in that same article. So Antifa did all the work, doxed all these guys. ProPublica picked up on it, made it a popular thing, because no one cares what Antifa says. Like no one goes to Antifa blogs and reads them except the Antifa, who are subhuman scum. So when someone like ProPublica, who pretends to be, this unbiased journalistic outfit, which is a joke, They promote it to their audience, and all of a sudden it becomes legitimate. The SPLC does the same exact thing. They pretend to legitimacy. They pretend to be unbiased. They call their propagandists something ridiculous, like investigative reporters. I think Hayden is like a senior investigative reporter at the SPLC, and the titles are insane. But once they put forth this thing, everybody said, "Oh well, the SPLC said this, so it's no longer Antifa propaganda." And so this is what they've been doing for years. This is the hoodwink, the bamboozling that these leftist institutions have been doing all this time.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have a number of other organizations that are kind of tied into that. I'm talking about media organizations, where you do have journalists, so-called journalists, that are basically using their position as reporters and as journalists to lobby for pushing the envelope, so to speak, in terms of their political opposition, right? They target specific individuals, they target specific groups, and there are specific outlets and even specific journalists that are very effectful at that, and they keep returning to these individuals that they would want to try to tarnish. And ultimately, I think it's about censorship, but it's also about destroying their reputation and defame them ultimately. But you have people like, Will Summers at the Daily Beast, and Jared Holt to a certain extent, Media Matters. There's a couple of women in this little New York circle clique that's risen up recently, which kind of connects with the whole alternative influencers network. Remember that report? It was like this, they're documenting everybody and trying to find the ties between them. And it's almost like they have this grand conspiracy, how all these groups are tied together and stuff like that.
I didn't see that report, actually.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, that's interesting. Take a look at that if you missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that after this. But
Data and Society,
just pretty clear.
Just briefly, Data and Society, of course, the usual suspects, really, when it comes down to it, in terms of the funding behind it. They even have it on Data and Society. I think it's dataandsociety.org or .net, I think it is. Just go to funding or funders or something like that on the webpage. I'll pull it up in a moment. And, of course, it goes through the usual Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, even New York Times is part of it, Open Society, George Soros organization, the Ford Foundation, just to mention a few. They have a slew of them on there, right? But even established media companies are there funding a group that is designated to target, in most cases, also independent media, right? The new and up-and-coming people who have YouTube channels, much smaller outfits, of course, but still, they still pose enough of a threat, I think, to the media establishment that they are willing to fund groups like this. So they target them, they write about them, and then those sources are being used, like for the wiki pages about people, it's being used as the underlying references, which legitimizes people to be, for example, censored and targeted. They have this kind of tactic where they also build up this straw man over a number of months or even years in some cases, where they self-reference their own articles, right? They have a partner on this site that wrote something, then they build on that, and then they add on to this lie a little bit, and they build this monster, this straw man, basically. And when you break it down, you realize, like, wait a minute, that was just based on opinions. That was incorrect. This is a misquotation. But voila, that's how they write the truth, right, these days. That's history in the making.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like Napoleon said, history is nothing but a fable agreed upon. And it's like Hitler said, too, that if you're not getting slandered by these people, you're not doing your job.